Alrighty, so what I want to do is I want to make a simple kind of sci-fi-ish chair for us. And this will be kind of interesting and dynamic. It'll kind of use a lot of the same stuff we used on the kind of the table itself, but we'll have a little bit of cushions, use a little subdivision surface modifier for that. Work with multiple objects, of course. So in this case, remember, you can just go to right when you open up Blender, you just pick the general, right? There's like those, you can open old files, but then there's that kind of options for things like general or 2D animation. You'll see these. So when you're starting a brand new scene, just kind of do general, and that'll just start with the default cube. Of course, I can go to modeling because we want to have a bit more of our stuff focused on the modeling environment. You might not want to see your light in your camera, so remember, you can always kind of turn those off, right? There we go. Remember F frame selection, and these are currently still all selected. And I'm kind of in edit mode for vertex. Now in this case, I think it's going to be a good idea to start off with our cushions, right? Just because that'll give us kind of a framework for what we can make our legs to be and all that stuff in terms of futuristic technique. So I'm going to start off with my cushions. And in this case, I've already got my nice cube there. Of course, we want to work with symmetry. So one of the things I always do is, and there's actually like an add-on that technically allows you to do a cut mirror, but it's still great for you guys to know how to kind of do this normally without that, right? So Alt-C, right? Remember, Alt-C is your quick key for loop cut, right? Alt-C. So I can click on that, and there you go, and you can kind of see that puts that edge loop right in there for us. Remember, you can always go to the options down here, and you'll see smoothness is 0, so it'll be flat. Number of cuts is 1. That's fine. That's what we want to default. But remember, when you first do a loop cut, if you just click, it puts it in right at the center. You have to left-click drag to hold it to actually kind of drag it along the surface, right? So just keep that in mind a bit. That's by default, when you left-click, it just puts it right flat on there, right in the center, I should say. So in this case, that's good. And I'll just hit 3, hit Q, go back to my regular selection tool. And remember, what you can do is you can just select this face, up arrow to grow, right? Remember, up arrow is your grow. If you go to select menu, you'll see select more and less. Up arrow, down arrow, more and less. Delete, right? Delete on your keyboard, and then pick faces. There you go. And that's been, we've gotten rid of half of this. So I'm going to hit 4 to go back to object mode, right? We'll go to blue wrench, add modifier, right? Because we want to add this mirror modifier. So there we go. And we pick the x-axis, but we choose it by default, which is good. That's why I kind of put the edge loop down the center on the y there, because it sets it up for the x-axis for us. Remember, you can pick any axis, you can pick multiple, as we saw in our lamp. Now, I also like to have this on so I can kind of see the full effect going through, right? So if I hit 3, you'll notice kind of with it off, you don't really see it on both sides. With it on, you kind of see the wireframe and the selection on both sides. So you don't have to turn that on, but I like it on. Clipping. Remember, we turn that on because that way, if we move these off the center, they don't move off the center, right? With that off, you can move them apart, right? So clipping's super, super cool. When you know how to use that, it really makes your mirror modifier in Blender pretty awesome. So remember, I just loop cut to put an edge loop down the center. Then I selected faces, deleted, and then we just kind of applied a mirror modifier. Now in this case, our cushions tend to be a bit softer. So I'm going to go back to add modifier, subdivision surface. There we go. And you notice by default when we put a subdivision surface on, it gives us that kind of control cage off the surface. That's honestly annoying. There's no real good reason to have that on when you have a subdivision surface modifier on, particularly with ones that work quite well, which is most softwares, right? The only one I've seen that I can't stand the way it works is 3D Studio Max's, because you actually have to, even when you don't display it, you have to select the control cage properly, and it's just dumb. It's just dumb. Everybody else does it functionally well. Turn this on, right? That's why we love that little triangle, right? Because it shows through all that stuff properly. In this case, I'm also going to go to 4 for object mode, right? So I can hold down right mouse button, or not hold it down, but just click it, right? Click right mouse button. Brings up your object context menu. Right at the top is that shade smooth, that shades, so you don't get that faceting, right? Shade flat kind of makes it so each polygon shades individually of the rest of them. Shade smooth kind of makes them shade collectively. They kind of blend where the polygons meet at an edge, and they blend depending on the angle that you give it. Shade smooth, though, just does it full, like 180-degree angle. So in particular, that's quite useful. So remember, those are those kind of little steps to get this set up properly, right? Get your mirror modifier with the clipping, get your subdivision surface modifier on after the mirror, right? Although in Blender 2.9, you can actually move them up or down, right? You can actually move them around by clicking on that little guy right there. And I usually turn these triangles on so you can see the full proper effects of them, right? You can see them fully in edit mode, which is useful. And now, of course, if I want, I can move this down, right? With W for move tool, move it forward a little bit, move it backward a little bit. We can start to get a bit of a cushion shape, right? Remember, if you have a quickie set up for it also already, you can do select linked, right? Spacebar is my quickie for it, so you can move that up a little bit to have it kind of line up more a little bit on the world axes. And you just easily just kind of adjust this a little bit. Now, in this case, it's still a bit soft for us, right? So I want to add a bit more edge loops, right? Because this is one of the things you have to understand about subdivision surfaces, right? Is that they're technically adding more geometry, right? So particularly you see it like in a shade flat, right? You can kind of see there's 4 polygons there. If I turn this level up in viewport, it's even more, right? So there's kind of a 16 there. So what it's doing is it's virtually adding more polygons, but only virtually, right? You're still editing the simple version, right? But it's kind of virtually adding these extra polygons, but it's also using an algorithm that kind of sucks in the corners that rounds off the shape. So it tends to be pretty cool for organic stuff or highly curved stuff, right? In this case here. But what's cool is you can actually, if you understand how to use your loop cuts and put edge loops in close to corners, right, you can sharpen those shapes up. So I probably want the front to be a bit softer, but the back doesn't need to be quite as soft, right? Because the front, you want to be a little softer because your legs go over that. You want it to be comfortable. Remember, Alt-C for loop cut, although it is right here, but Alt-C is the quick key. And if I left-click drag, you notice how as I move this cursor more towards these corners, those corners become a little boxier. If I was to left-click drag again to add another one, you see how it becomes even boxier? We could even do something here as well to just kind of box up the shape just enough. Maybe one down here a little bit so we get the boxiness a little more on the bottom. But it's really all about how close you get an edge or edge loop to another one where there's a corner, right? Where there's a corner. If I grab this edge and move it, see how it becomes sharper? If I move it away, it gets softer, right? That's because what you're doing is you're basically shrinking the rounding, right? It's always, you're only ever really seeing the rounding in a subdivision surface at the corners, right? Where there's an angle difference. And so by basically moving this edge loop or edge in, you see how you're making that corner smaller and smaller in terms of shape? And so it's still trying to do that rounding, but it's making that rounding shape smaller and smaller, which makes it kind of have more of a bevel effect, right? Kind of good to know about that stuff, kind of neat. So you see how we can kind of get a bit of little softness kind of there if we want to. I can even hit 3 for face mode, grab those 2 faces, maybe move them out a little bit just to kind of maybe soften the side or give it a bit of an angle. So kind of neat stuff you can do there, right? I can even go to 2 for edge mode and grab these 2 edges, move them forward a little bit, maybe grab those 2 edges. And because mirror's on, right, we can kind of get a little bit of that nice roundness there. So kind of one of those neat things we can actually do with this, right? Even with hard surface stuff, you can still get some cool hard surface effects with subdivision surface on. Now remember, we are using subdivision surface as a shortcut, right? You will hear plenty of modelers say you should just work low res. That is a vestigial organ. That was really true like 10, 15 years ago, and always a bit more true about video games than, say, movies, right? Having said that, you really want to be careful with your subdivisional surface. One of my big rules is, 1, it's not appropriate for all models. If you're working with much boxier architectural stuff, many furniture parts, just go low res, right? Don't use subdivision surface. But when you're working with characters, creatures, maybe something with a lot of softness, a lot of curvature like a car, you can actually use subdivision surface quite effectively. But some of the rules for working with it are KISS, keep it simple, right? You want to let the subdivision surface do a lot of the work for you. You're really using it primarily to block in core primary forms, not doing all the little detailing. The other biggest thing is always apply it. A couple of you guys didn't quite apply it with some of your models. At some point, you want to apply this modifier so that you actually have a good low res, right? Because the idea behind, oh, don't use subdivisional surfaces, blah, 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 is you want your low res to look nice. And that is true. That is 100% true, whether it's for games or movies. A good-looking low-res is fundamentally going to allow you to visualize without having to be at hundreds of thousands of polygons what your deformation is going to look like, right? How they're going to work well. Film nowadays, if you look at the wireframes, they can get pretty dense. So I think it's kind of meaningless with films now. Video games have gotten significantly more powerful than they were 10, 15 years ago, right? Even there, if you're smart about how you use your subdivisional surfaces, they can be a good shortcut, right? Otherwise, you're adding in every edge loop by hand and having to round off a lot of the shape by hand, and that just takes more time. But remember, biggest rule is you better apply it. Also, keep it simpler, right? Don't try to add in every little detail, right? You still want these to be quite efficient. We're using it more as a kind of primary blocking in technique. Once you do that, you can still get quite efficient models that look nice in low res easily, right? So it's just a cool trick that if you get some good rules for working with it, when it's appropriate, it's quite useful for us, right? Particularly in this more modern age we're working with. Like I said, I kind of feel like some people's fears of subdivision surfaces algorithms or modifiers and their versions in all packages, it's kind of left over from earlier times. It's a vestigial organ. So keep in mind that we're using it more for softer, curved stuff, and we're not trying to add in bazillions of details yet, right? It's at its most useful when the difference is huge, right? Because that's when you'd have to add in pretty much all the edge loops applying a subdivision surface would add anyways. So the denser your mesh gets, the closer you are to final with your mesh, the less likely, particularly if you're in video games, to use a subdivision model you are, right? So I just wanted to we didn't really talk about that as much. I think we talked about it a little bit on our crab, but I wanted to kind of address it even more here. We're going to keep talking about that. We're using this as a shortcut so that we don't have to add in all of the edges by hand. So we don't have to shape all of them by hand. But we are going to try to keep it primarily simpler in terms of blocking in forms and let the subdivision surface do some of that work for us so that when we apply it later on, we'll still have an efficient mesh, but we also made our life a little bit easier, right? So keep that in mind. All right. So that's kind of good for a starting cushion. Maybe I'll make it a little bit less thick. So I'll grab a face. Spacebar is my quick key that I've set for select all, right? But it is select linked right here. And I'll just hit R for scale it down a bit, just to kind of flatten a little bit there. There we go. Now in this case, I can make a whole new cushion from this if I want to. But I kind of feel like I've already got this started, so I might as well just, select linked. And remember, you can hit Control D, right? And that makes a copy of this that we can then kind of rotate if we want to. Right? So I can kind of rotate this up, and I can move it up here. And it's already part of this object, right? So mirror and subdivision surface modifiers are already applied, which I love that about Blender so much, right? So easy just to duplicate right within an object, right? And that was just Control D, right? We've seen this before. We've used it a little bit before. In the mesh menu, there is something called duplicate, Control D, and it just takes whatever polygons. In this case, I had all of the cushions selected, and it duplicates those, right? Now, in this case, I want this front to be softer. So I can hit 2 for edges, right? I can double left click, because that's select edge loop, on this edge right here. And if I right click, it brings up my edge context menu, right? And this is a tool we haven't really seen yet. There is, in Blender, something called edge slide, right? Like I said, pretty much if you're used to Maya or 3ds Studio Max or even Modo, Blender has all of these things. You just have to figure what they're called and where they're at. And usually they're called the same stuff. For me, though, Modo and Blender just have the best, particularly Blender 2.8 and above with industry compatible, have the best workflows. I like Maya a lot, but nowadays I'm like Blender or Modo, and Blender's free, but also pretty awesome in its current state. So edge slide, right? And you'll notice that this allows you to slide along the already existing mesh, right? So we just edge slide, and then we do left click drag, kind of which direction we want to go. And what it does is it actually slides along the existing kind of perpendicular edges, right? The edges that are kind of here and here. What it does is it slides all those edges relative to those kind of perpendicular edges. If you go this way, it slides them on this one. If you go this way, it slides them on that one. And that's a neat way to get a second cushion really quickly and easily, just by simply duplicating this one, rotating it, moving around to get the shape, and then just slide that one back, right? Now, of course, we want this to kind of probably be a little lower. So remember, you can always go to 3 for face mode. And remember, I have quick keys set, right, for my mouse for tweak and circle select on my 5-button mouse. But remember, if you hit Q, that toggles through those, right? The one that's a circle is circle select. It does have a radius control, but this will allow you to kind of just left-click drag. Like it's like a paint select or a drag select, right? And then I could hit up arrow to kind of grow that selection a little bit. Remember, select menu, more or less, up arrow, right? And I can hit W, and I could hit middle mouse button to drag it down. Maybe a little bit out from this view. Maybe if I want to, rotate a little bit, right? There we go. And remember, middle mouse button just does your view rotate, which in this case, since it's pretty organic, is fine for us. I do want a little more ergonomics built in here, so I'm going to hit Alt-C, just so I can put a loop cut there and there. And I could easily then go in here and just hit W for move. Maybe move that back a little bit to give us a little bit more ergonomic shape for that. Maybe in a little bit to give it a little bit more dynamicism. Maybe this one can come forward a little bit, right? So we can give a little bit more ergonomic shape to this. I go to 3 for face mode, and if I want to turn on circle select again, I can, right? And you could easily just kind of grab these right there, right? Hit W for move them back a little bit. And so remember, you could select just certain things and move them to shape them. You could scale them. You could do all kinds of cool stuff to them, right? I can grab those two, move them in a little bit there if I wanted to. And remember, you even have your tweak tool, of course, right? I'm using my mouse button. I have a 5-button mouse here. You can assign those things like circle select and tweak, which I use all the time, to those mouse buttons to make it nice and easy to get to them. But remember, Q toggles you through those. And remember, you can just come in here and you can tweak stuff, right? I can tweak this face down, over a little bit. I can hit 2 for edge mode, tweak it. And remember, what you're doing is you're just left-click moving at the same time, right? So you're selecting and moving at the same time, and it just makes tweaking shapes a little bit quicker and easier like this. And so now we can see we're starting to get a decent cushion here. I feel like I'm even going to put one here, maybe so we can get a little bit of ergonomics there. And remember, you can even turn your tweak tool on and just use it as a selection tool, right? And I can get maybe a little bit of ergonomics there for that. And we can start to get kind of some cushions for ourselves for this guy, right? So I'm going to do Control S for save and give it a proper name. Call it Sci-Fi Room, and then we'll kind of switch this to chair. There we go. That way we've got this saved. And you can see this gives us kind of a nice, good kind of basic starting point for these cushions. Now, at this point, I think I'm probably about ready to stop the video, and then we can kind of make the legs on another video. But before I finish up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply my modifiers, right? Just to kind of remind you guys of this. So I'm going to go to 4 for object mode. Now, here's the thing. If you apply your subdivision surface modifier first, it will do this. You'll notice kind of the ends here kind of aren't quite rounded like they were before, right? So I always actually apply the mirror modifier first, right? Because that will kind of properly do the clipping and merging of the vertices kind of along those. So we go to apply mirror modifier, and then apply subdivision surface modifier, right? And now we see when we go to 3, that's our low resolution, right? Now, of course, modern Blender 2.9, if you go to here, the little pull down next to the 2 circles, you'll see there is statistics, and you can see your polygon count here. And you can see that this is only about 1,000 triangles for these cushions. That's pretty efficient for the vast majority of pipelines that you're in. If you need to, and you feel like, man, I feel like I could save an extra 100, 200 triangles, go to 2, right? And let's just say, hey, this edge loop here, maybe this edge loop here, and this one here, maybe kind of, that one right there. Those aren't necessary, right? I could easily take those out if I wanted to. So I can hit delete, and I can go dissolve edges, take those out. And you see the shape changes a bit, right? But you see how we just saved ourselves a couple hundred triangles there? I could easily grab that, double click on that edge loop, use edge slide to kind of bring that down a little bit. But you see how by actually being smart about how you're using your subdivisional surface modifier, not adding bazillions of edge loops, focusing on the primary forms, it's quite easy to get a great looking and still pretty efficient low resolution mesh without having to do as many initial edge loops and as much initial shaping. So the idea that you can't get a nice looking low resolution mesh that'll deform well by using subdivision surface modifiers is kind of a myth. It's kind of a vestigial organ. You do need some good rules for working with it, right? Keep it simple, apply it, right? And sometimes early in the process, and then you can do some further modeling later on the low res. It's also quite easy to just come in here and just literally spend seconds taking out a few edge loops where they will affect the shape very little, right? So it's usually the edge loops that if you take them out, the shape won't be affected a lot. Like maybe we'll take this one out here really quick. Delete, dissolve edges, double click on these guys, edge slide. In this case, you see without the mirror modifier, it'll kind of, you maybe want to reapply your mirror modifier to it. But for us, this is still going to be quite efficient. And I just kind of wanted to really get you guys remind you guys how to properly use a subdivision social modifier, right? You do have to some good rules for working with it though. So, because you do want your low resolutions to look pretty nice. But also, particularly for games, be reasonably efficient. All right, so there we go. Those are our cushions. Like I said, that'll be a great place to stop this video, and then we can come back and do the legs in our next video.